and welcome back to Franklin Covey's twice weekly podcast on leadership with Scott Miller. That's me. I'm your host for nearly 7 years. Gosh, close to 500 episodes, where every Tuesday and Friday I am privileged to sit in this chair for this podcast sponsored by the Franklin Covey Company to interview and spotlight people that are making a difference, people that show up in all different form and fashion. Sometimes they are academics, researchers, scientists. Often they are C-suite leaders, people responsible for sales, culture, strategy, execution, retention, engagement in their organization. Sometimes they are entrepreneurs or intrapreneurs. Sometimes they are people that have suffered from some setback, trauma, or tragedy, and not just lived to tell about it, but some of the courage to teach through it. All designed to make you a better leader both formally or informally in your family and your careers, or in the words of our co-founder, Stephen Covey, just to become more highly effective. Today, I'm elated to have one of the world's most prominent authorities on workplace belonging. Her name is Dr. Beth Kaplan, and she's just released a new book, love this cover, titled Braving the Workplace, Belonging at the Breaking Point. Dr. Beth Kaplan, welcome to On Leadership.
Thanks so much for having me, Scott.
What an honor. You are known through the world as being arguably the leading practitioner, thought leader, expert, scientist on workplace bravery, on the topic of belonging, which I think a lot of people will immediately associate with some kind of diversity, equity, and inclusion solution. We'll talk about how that's different and necessarily not connected. I think everyone wants to belong from the earliest ages in life. In fact, you opened the book with a great story about your own yearning for belonging. We'll go there in just a moment. First, Beth, we're delighted that you're here. Everyone is going to tune in, because who does not want to either belong or create a culture where people feel they belong? Talk about retention and engagement. Reintroduce yourself for those who may not be aware of you yet or are right now buying your book on Amazon or their favorite digital retailer. Talk about your academic background, your professional background, a little bit about how you've come to be known as the world's expert on belonging.
Thanks so much, Scott. Hi, everyone out there. Beth Kaplan, and as Scott mentioned, I am one of the world's leading experts on belonging, something that makes me incredibly proud. I am a researcher and academic, and I have over 30 years of executive experience as well, really primarily focused on leadership development and increasing employee retention. So most of my life has been spent creating belonging moments in the workplace, growing and coaching our leaders to be the best they can be, and to coach others as well.
Beth, your book, Braving the Workplace, starts with a story, the genesis of your passion around this, with your own struggle with, belonging, your upbringing, a quite harrowing story. Maybe share a little bit about what your upbringing was like and how that drove this lifelong art pursuit, passion, and science that you dedicated so much time to.
Thank you. Yes. So, spoiler alert for anyone reading the book, I did not set out to study belonging. However, like most researchers who study their own trauma, I set out to understand why so many people, including myself, felt like they had to prove their worth to just exist in certain places. Growing up in one of the suburbs of Philadelphia, I felt that I had a very limited worldview of who I was and wanted to be. I grew up in, unfortunately, a dysfunctional family, which many of us have done. And then as I grew up in the workplace, I sought this concept of family, this camaraderie, this experience that I placed so much emphasis on. And in order to get there, I felt very much that I had to fit in. And through the workplace in general, I started to realize that I was putting too many eggs in one basket, like many of you out there, right? And what I started to realize is that a lot of the things that I was doing was all around this concept of fitting in. And as I really start to understand what that looked like, I realized that the more I tried to fit in, the more I stood out. And was that such a bad thing? So after being in the corporate world for a very long time, I went to grad school where I started to talk about things like workplace collaboration and cooperation and fear and isolation. And it's almost like I got a sudden flash of inspiration that most of my life's quest has been around this topic of belonging. And for me, it became about what I could do to bring these tools to other people, whether it was giving them the language to understand belonging or the permission to stop chasing fitting in, to start building belonging within themselves. That's my whole life's work and passion.
Beth, let's level set. What are the main confusions when corporate leaders or investors or servant leaders or politicians, and they hear about belonging, they think what? That you want to reframe or re-educate them on?
DEI, hands down. The number one thing I get asked most often is people actually, to rephrase, people will say, oh, you're a belonging expert. What do you think was going on with DEI right now? And so while diversity, equity, equality, inclusion are super important, belonging really does not have as much to do with those constructs. And so when we merge them, it does them a disservice. So right off the bat, what I do is I reset with them, and I'll do that here as well. Belonging is the innate desire to be part of something larger than ourselves without sacrificing who we are. So it's first important to understand that reset. It's more than membership, it's more than attachment, and it's certainly not fitting in. What I do when I talk to leaders in any spaces really is get them to understand that belonging is meeting their employees where they're at. Scott, I'm sure you remember the days where we used to say, everyone huddle around our mission. Those days are different now. They expect the workplace to huddle around their individualism and what makes them unique. And so when we try to do a one size fits all by saying things like, you belong here, not so creative, but that's the truth. That's what people do in the corporate world. It's really demystifying that and getting to understand how those dynamics work better. Here's the thing. The cost of getting belonging wrong is immense. It's measurable, in fact, and it's damaging. So really, it's getting people to understand that this is an important problem that stems beyond performance and is really about well-being of your organization and your people.
So Beth, for any leader who's listening right now, they're thinking, well, wait, there's some friction there because I'm being told that the new generation of colleagues wants to align with a mission that is clear and valuable and has purpose, and that we have to be a mission-driven organization while still driving profit. And you're saying, well, although that's true, it's not just about having everyone aligned to the company's mission. It's about the company meeting the people where they are as well. Like, thread that needle for us, because that can be a little confusing to some people.
Oh, it can be completely confusing. Belonging is historically clear as mud. The thing is, when people say that they want to be wrapped around a mission, the number one thing you should be asking is whose mission? No one debates the fact that people do need to have a rallying cry around your mission, your vision, right, your goals, so that there's alignment. But in order for that to work at the first line level and the team level, the leader needs to understand the employees' values, what makes them them, and what their individual mission is. Now, I don't mean that you need to learn the employees, information on their next of kin or their blood type, but you do need to understand what's important to them, what they value, and in turn, what it means for them to feel a sense of belonging to themselves and to the workplace as well.
So whose responsibility is that? Is that the C-suite? Is that the board? Is that the executive level leader? Is that the team leader? Is it the individual's person to ensure that they belong? Where is that responsibility lie?
I think that's a great question. And I think it lies within ourselves to understand. That's really the primary difference between inclusion, for example, and belonging. Inclusion is determined by others. Belonging is determined by you. Only you can determine whether you belong somewhere or not. That being said, how many times have you seen companies become the destination for belonging? A lot of people put it out there. We are the place to belong. Come to us. And that's not always the best place to advertise your sense of belonging, because when people feel it, you don't need to impose it. So really understanding the difference between performative belonging and the individual sense of belonging. And I think that's another reason why the book I wrote is going to hopefully have an impact, because it's more of a mission than it is a lesson on belonging. And it's really for people to really dive into what their employees look like now compared to when we put those statements out 5-6 years ago.
Beth, I'm going to say this respectfully, but this is not the first time I am sure you have been asked this question. What do you say to the naysayer that says, oh, boo-hoo-hoo, you don't feel like you belong? It's a career. It's a job. We're actually not your family. We're not responsible for your mental health or your wellness. We are a company, and we're hiring you to do a job. And if and when you don't feel like you belong, we encourage you to go work somewhere else. Everyone has to work. Not everyone has to work here. Now, I've put like 10 thoughts into that one sentence. You say, what about that?
I say to those people, no problem. Just look at the bottom line numbers. Employees who feel excluded are 50% more likely to leave your company than those that feel a strong sense of belonging. So you could do what you want and ignore the issue, but it's going to cost you, and it's going to cost you big time. And I think there was a study recently that said in the United States alone, people are spending upwards between $450 and $550 billion. It would be smarter of us to get to the root cause and try to fix that issue before it costs us in the end. So if you are one of those people out there and you think, okay, this is great, this is hokey, and I'm done with it, you want to look at your bottom line numbers and really start to understand the companies with strong belonging cultures see a 50% reduction in turnover. So just do the math. If you don't want to deal with the emotions, deal with the math then.
So what does it look like, sound like, feel like for a leader who has done their best, their share of the responsibility of building a culture where people don't belong at the breaking point, but they belong in such a way that they see work as a refuge? They see their workplace as a safe place. Give us some practical application as a leader of a team of 25, 30 people. I should be doing what to drive my share of the belonging responsibility?
I'm going to go back to meeting employees where they're at in order to understand what your team dynamic looks like around belonging. You need to learn what your own type of belonging looks like. Is it true belonging, right? You feel greater and you don't have to sacrifice. Is it thwarted where you have a lack of belonging? There's other types as well. So you need to understand what that looks like first. And I say to those leaders out there, it's not a bad idea to just point blank ask your people. Many of the people you work with that they're just not going to come out and say, hey, Scott, I don't feel like I belong here. It takes a lot to get them there, and it's a lot of hardship, right? So understanding and putting it out there that you want to know them better to what's important to them and feel genuine and authentic is key. If you're just doing it to check a corporate box, it is going to come out as lip service. So you have to be authentic. You have to understand what the person values and what they respect and what matters to them. Different things matter to different people, and the way they receive praise is super, super important. Some people want it in balloons written in the sky, like me, and other people want quiet notes of appreciation. So if you're a leader on your team and you want to get to know the team better, start talking to them about it. Ask them how they like to receive praise. Ask them what they liked about their last 3 managers and what they did not like. And then in return, tell them how you work best. How do you communicate? How do you like to see things? When don't you want to be communicated with? What are your boundaries that you need to set? Explain them. I always like to say clear is kind. And that's important for leaders to know, that the spectrum of care and kindness is really important when it comes to our sense of belonging in the workplace.
When I look back on our nearly 500 episodes, I think if I had to congeal them into topics, the ones that have either resonated the most with our listeners or subscribers or have been the most common, they are topics around our origin stories, our mental wellness, how to create cultures where people choose to stay and refer their friends into, and trauma, right? Trauma is a very ubiquitous term right now being used by everybody, capital T, small t. We've heard this phrase, and you write about it in your book, about workplace-inflicted trauma.
Yes.
What does that mean? How sensationalized is that versus how real is that? And how does creating a culture of belonging maybe help to minimize that?
Yeah, so the trauma is real. I'd like to say one of the questions I get asked most often, but isn't it only just workplace trauma? Workplace trauma is real trauma. Anyone out there that is worried that your trauma is less than someone else's, you need to change the narrative that you're talking about within yourself. If it's less important to you, it will be less important to others. And you need to get ahead of that because trauma is trauma. What I would say, Scott, is one of the most overlooked traumas in the workplace is what we call belonging uncertainty. Not sure where you stand, what your contribution looks like, how much you matter, and how you feel accepted, not just by your peers, but how you feel accepted by yourself. So I would say that workplace trauma is incredibly real. It's incredibly important. And because we ignore it and people tamper it down, it's not getting better. It's really not.
Beth, as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking about the millions of leaders who will listen to and watch this podcast over the course of the coming days and weeks and months and years and buy your book. As a result of it, I think they're going to discover a couple of things. One is that they have some level of accountability and responsibility for whether they do belong. How do they take ownership on that? The other is, how do leaders, culture carriers, and organizations create a culture where people feel like they can belong? I ask that in the idea of psychological safety. It's another term we hear all the time. What is the link between belonging and psychological safety? I don't know of a C-suite leader right now that's not thinking about that term.
Love that question too, Scott, because there is a very distinct and clear link between belonging and psychological safety. Just because you have psychological safety, though, it does not mean that you will necessarily feel like you belong in a place. However, it is a major detractor. If you're not feeling safe in your workplace, then you're not going to want to be there. It's that simple. I mean, you think about this. You go into a place that you don't feel comfortable, you know whether or not you belong somewhere within the first 7 seconds. That's real.
Thanks.
Now, in the workplace, you typically will feel it out just a little bit longer than that 7 seconds, right? Sometimes it's months, sometimes it's weeks, hopefully not just days. But as leaders, we have a major responsibility, and it's not going to be surprising, but our managers have the biggest influence on our sense of belonging in the workplace. So think about this a little deeper. If you're a leader out there, you need to start thinking about people beyond the numbers, beyond their productivity, and understand how they exist as humans and how they want to show up. One of the best things that you can do is simply care about them. Care is the number one thing that employees want from their leaders in the workplace. Number one. I always ask this question and people say trust and respect. And yes, everyone wants to be trusted and respected, but cared for. And when we talk about care, it's a majorly large spectrum. There's kindness all the way down to advocacy. Advocacy meaning things like saying your name in a room full of opportunity that you're not in. Kindness can also be candor, giving people honest, direct feedback. One of the things I think people mix up quite a bit in the workplace, especially our leaders, is that all of this has to be emotional and very touchy-feely. That's not what we're saying at all. You just have to be someone that cares about others. And let's be honest, most of us got into leadership because we want to coach and grow other people. Expressing care makes us feel like we're doing just that.
Beth, does the insecurity around belonging, does the science show that it impacts certain profiles of people more than others? The reason I ask that is I'm obviously a white male in my 50s with a great career and some level of, of head start, if you will. And I don't feel like I suffer from a pervasive sense of not belonging. It might just be my overabundance of confidence. It might be that I'm not in enough situations that are unlike the ones I'm always in. I'm guessing the research shows that certain types of people or personalities are more insecure about their belonging.
Absolutely. There's definitely marginalized employees that feel a deeper sense of thwarted belonging, which is a lack of belonging, as well as the need to sacrifice. And Scott, I could actually challenge you on that one. I bet you have felt that lack of belonging in certain circumstances. And
yes, it was called the National Honor Society in high school. I did not belong.
No, you were so smart. So but think about this. I bet you have sacrificed yourself for the workplace.
Oh, now that I have done. Oh, your book spoke to me like a sonnet written with my name and rhyme about how I have sacrificed my well-being, not my sense of ethics, but my life balance, my mental health, my physical health. I have denied myself time off in doctor's appointments to make sure that I felt like I was contributing to a point of extraordinary regret.
Absolutely. And I bet you it's sometimes in the name of resilience, or this false sense of resilience that we push in the corporate life. I think about it in this way. I know you have sons. I know they play tennis. I bet you they have performance coaches. And the job of a performance coach is to understand the people you're coaching, what their strengths are, what their weaknesses, and when they need to slow down. However, in the workplace, we're rewarded for speeding up, for overcommitting, for skipping sports games, for skipping vacations, right? So that sense of sacrificial belonging happens when we consciously or subconsciously give up what we value, including our physical and mental health, for the sake of a company, believing that this disequilibrium will equate to this authentic experience of belonging. So even though you are a white male and feel like belonging might be for others, right? Because it's not called out specifically for you. Belonging is agnostic when it comes to the fact that everyone experiences it. It's really hardwired in our DNA, actually. That being said, yes, there are marginalized groups that may feel it differently and more consistently, this lack of belonging.
Not that I needed to, but you won me back over. Where was your book 30 years ago, Dr. Kaplan? Okay. I know. Well, you had to do the research and you had to understand it. And so now I think Braving the Workplace is going to be extraordinarily well received, interestingly, both by individual contributors who are trying to find out, where do I fit and why am I unhappy and where can I be my best and contribute, and leaders who are dedicated and interested in building a workplace that people don't have to brave.
That's right.
Let me ask you another question.
Oh, sorry.
No, please, go ahead.
Braving the Workplace is really about being yourself every day in a world that tells you to be something different. And whether you are the low-level project manager or the CEO, you all experience it. There's just this misconception, this story we tell ourselves that others may belong better than us, right? And that's not true. This is the thing. We all have this fear of being isolated and lonely. And even though we're hardwired for connection, there's something about it that makes us feel genuinely unworthy of it. And that's a universal workplace experience, right? So it's important to understand it impacts everyone and it's felt at all levels.
Beth, there's a lot of people that are listening and watching today who are on the fence, and they'll resonate with this. I once had a colleague and a coach who said something profound to me. She said, "Hey, Scott, there comes a time in everyone's career when you've given 90% of what you have to give to the organization, and you've taken from them 90% of what they have to give to you, and the last 10% either way may just not be worth it." In your book, you have a concept where you ask the question, should I stay or should I go? The doctor is in. For those who right now are asking themselves, should I stay or should I go? Because I feel like I'm braving the workplace. What advice would you give that person, those million people who are listening and asking themselves, that 50% of the workforce who's, searching themselves for that question? What do you say?
Oh, and 50% would even be a luxury. In the state of Pennsylvania alone, it's about 94% of people are unhappy with their jobs. 94%.
So, Beth, stop there. I'm going to come back to have you answer the real question. Okay, that's ridiculous. That is because they are malcontents. That is because they're greedy. That's because they have problems outside of the workplace that have nothing to do with the hard work from their leader. Why are 94% of employed people in Pennsylvania unhappy with their job?
My guess around it, Scott, is that they want more for themselves and they feel stuck and they just don't know how to get unstuck. When I was writing the book, the 94%ers were probably the ones I was thinking about at that time of, I know what it means to feel unhappy or alone or undervalued. And that feeling of stuck it's not real. It's really not, but it feels that way until you get yourself unstuck. And unstuck looks very different in very different capacities. Here's the truth. You can't just go out and quit. That's what many of us want to do. And I'm here to tell you, been there, done that. And quitting does not necessarily make you healthy. It gets you out of a situation, but not really. It's almost like that song, Hotel California. You can check out, but you can never leave. And that's what happens with workplace PTSD. You may go to a different place, but until you resolve the issues that you didn't deal with, they're going to come back at you. It's a very annoying thing that quitting does not equal quitting those emotions. But that's the truth. So if you are out there and you're thinking to yourself, I want to go so badly, but I can't, Or how do I know when it's time to leave? You need to stack your thoughts against your belief system. Is this hitting my values? Is this mentally safe for me? Is this physically safe for me? If your answers to those questions are no, that's when you know it's time to really start sincerely looking. On the reverse, let's be real. Our jobs contribute to our livelihoods. It is just not that easy to leave something, and nor should we always do that. There's certain value in adversity, but to my earlier point, not when it's impacting your health, both mental and physical. If it is having an impact on that, that's a sure sign time that you're ready to go.
Beth, let's end with the title of your book. You actually called it Braving the Workplace, Belonging at the Breaking Point. I'll bet you put some time both into that title and to the tagline. I've never asked an author about this, but I'm interested in the conversation. Why did you title the book Braving the Workplace? And as importantly, I love this tagline, Belonging at the Breaking Point. Address both of those, please.
Sure. Braving the Workplace is an homage to one of my research heroes, Brene Brown, who really got people starting to think about belonging in her book, Braving the Wilderness. So I believe that that's a direct continuation. And belonging at the breaking point truly was inspired by one of the folks that you've had on your podcast before, which is Beth Murphy, who talks a lot about loneliness and how we're at this global loneliness epidemic. And so I really truly believe that all of these research and these super smart people have gotten it right. So my hope is that people pick this up, they have a reset of belonging, an understanding of how it serves them best, and they have a path forward and a guide to get them there.
Beth, I don't know of a guest on this podcast or an author at large that doesn't have a vision of how they want their reader to experience the book. So finish us off with, when someone is reading your book, you hope they absorb it and apply it how?
I hope that anyone out there reading the book feels less alone, feels like they can be more of themselves, and feels inspired to get there. That's what I hope.
Dr. Beth Kaplan, Mel Robbins endorsed your book by saying it's time to be who you are and go after what you want. Let this book be your guide to get you there. Your book is titled Braving the Workplace, Belonging at the Breaking Point. Beth, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks so much.
And we'll see you back here next week for a new conversation on leadership.